Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today I will read How to Be Rich. This book is written by Andy Stanley. The moral of this book is it is not what you have, it is what you do with what you have. So let's start. Introduction. Like most young men, I grew up hoping to be rich. Not filthy rich, not private jet rich, just rich enough to be able to do what I wanted and I wanted when, without worrying about how much it cost. Average rich. My initial strategy for attaining rich was to be a rock star. Live in hilltop houses, drive in 15 cars. So I thought myself to play the guitar and piano, rounded up a few high school friends, and started a band. I had no doubt that I was on my way to fortune and fame. Actually, I really did not care about the fame part. From the beginning, I have been convinced that it is better to be rich than famous. Anonymity was a price I was willing to pay. Now, as you might imagine, my parents were not thrilled with my career choice. My dad, in particular, when people asked me what I was planning to do when I grew up, my dad would give me that look and then answer for me, Andy has not decided yet. Needless to say, the rock star thing did not work out. If country music had been as big in 70s as it is now, I might have had a chance. And honestly, sometimes when I play that old 6 string, I think about you, wonder what went wrong. Let's move on. Once I accepted the fact that I did not have the chops for the music biz, I was forced to come up with another get-rich career scheme. And that's when it hit me. The ministry. I will be a pastor. After all, pastors have lots of money. Now, while that may be true to a limited extent today, back then I had never heard of a rich preacher. As you probably know, my dad is a pastor. My parents never owned their own home until I was in middle school. Before that, we lived in a parsonage, a house that a church purchased for the pastor and his family to use. It came with the job, with just part of the package, kind of like being the president of the United States, except we had to mow the lawn, and unlike the first family, we had to get permission to redecorate or repaint or anything. After all, it was not our house, it was the people's house, as in church people, and church people can be particular about what you do with their house, and that's understandable. In those days, pastors did not stay more than 3 or 4 years. So, there was no point in making a lot of expensive changes for someone who was not going to be around that long. All that so to say, the notion of getting rich by way of pastoring never dawned on me. As I said, I would never meet a rich preacher, and we certainly were not rich. Not the kind of rich I was dreaming of anyway. We always had enough, but rich is about having more than enough. We had what we needed, but rich is about having more than you need. Rich is about having extra, isn't it? When I was 5th grade, We lived in a small town in Florida where my dad was the pastor of the First Baptist Church. The parsonage was located in a typical small town, middle class neighborhood, not upper middle class, just middle class. One afternoon, my dad asked me to ride with him when we took our housekeeper home. Yes, we had a housekeeper. Back then, we referred to her as our maid, and she was fine with that. Actually, she was proud of that. She was the preacher's maid, and she made sure all her maid friends knew about it. Normally, she drove, but on this particular afternoon, her car was in the shop, so we drove her home. Turns out, I had never been to that particular part of our small town. The houses were small, the yards were mostly dirt, and there was junk everywhere. I still remember feeling uncomfortable. When we got to her house, she invited us in. I remember thinking, I don't want to go in there. For whatever reason, we did not. When we got back home, our house looked large by comparison. Our yard looked manicured by comparison. Even our car felt fine in comparison to what I saw in our maid's neighborhood. It was while we were living in that same house that a friend from church came over to play. His name was Bruce. I can still remember Bruce standing in our kitchen, looking around and saying, "Andy, your house is so big. Are you rich?" I was so uncomfortable. Rich? We were not rich, and our house was not big. Our house was normal size. But when we took Bruce home that evening, I understood. By comparison, our house was big. By comparison, I am sure it looked to Bruce as if we were rich. Heck, by comparison, we were rich. And therein lies the problem, doesn't it? Rich is the other guy. Rich is that other family. Rich is not just having extra. Rich is having as much extra as the person who has more extra than you do. Rich is having more than you currently have. If that's the case, you can be rich and not know it. You can be rich and not feel it. You can be rich and not act like it. And that is a problem. In fact, that's why I wrote this book. If you purchased the book with your own money, or could have had you been so inclined, you are much further ahead for the financial game than you might imagine. And if that hard for you to imagine, no worries. For the next 7 chapters, I am going to do my best to convince you that you are in fact a have rather than a have not. Better yet, I am going to use everything in my arsenal of persuasive power to convince you that you are rich. Once you are convinced, I am going to walk you through a short passage from the New Testament that instructs us rich people how to be good at it. Because, as you are about to discover, assuming you have not observed this already, most rich people are not all that good at being rich, perhaps you included. While this is a new publication for me, this is not a new message. Every fall for the past 7 years, I have stood in front of our Atlanta area churches and told him they are a bunch of haves who act like have not, and that God and I are not happy about it. Okay, that's not exactly how I parsed it. But when it comes to this particular topic, I have been known to be uncomfortably bold. Our churches journey began with a message series I purchased in 2007 entitled How to Be Rich. Two things promoted the series. First, our culture incessant message about how to get rich when. In fact, most of us got rich a long time ago and nobody told us. Second, Paul's instructions to Timothy regarding how rich Christians are to behave. After studying this passage, I was left with the realization that a lot of rich Christians are not very good at being rich. Then it dawned on me. Well, of course, they are not. Nobody has taught them how. So, for 4 weekends, I navigated our congregation through the terms and conditions of Paul's instructions to rich people. The series resulted in a lot of healthy conversations, so I followed up the next year with a message on the same topic combined with a month-long generosity campaign aimed at our local communities. I told our congregants that we were going to practice being rich so we would be good at it should we ever be so fortunate. The generosity campaign included a hefty donation goal that was due by the end of the week. Most of it came in that day. In addition to financial support for local and international charities, we asked them to donate 2 or 3 hours of their time over the course of the month by volunteering at the charities chosen to receive the funds we collected. And by the way, none of these charities asked us for money. That's what makes Be a Rich campaign so much fun. Behind the scenes, a team of church staff and volunteers went into our local communities to find charities that were making a measurable difference but who could use a little wind in their sails. So imagine their surprise a few weeks later when a handful of our folks showed up at their doors with checks. In most cases, big checks they were not expecting, and imagine the reaction a few weeks after. That when we opened our services with a video of staff and volunteers at these world-class charities receiving their surprise donations, not a dry eye in the place. Suddenly and simultaneously, every day, everybody in the house experienced in the truth of Jesus. Word that is, in fact, more blessed to give than to receive. In the fall of 2012, I changed our churches to give $1.5 million toward our Be Rich giving initiative. They gave $5.2 million in a week, and we in turn gave 100% of it away. No shipping and handling cost, no overhead or operating expenses, no expensive vacations for the pastor and his family. We gave it all away. In addition, our congregants provided 34,000 volunteers hours to local charities that are volunteer dependent. And if that were enough, we collected 20,332 Operations Christmas Child show boxes for Samaritans birds, the largest collection they have ever received from a local church. Pretty good for a rich rehearsal. I am bragging. Heck yeah, I am so proud of our churches that I get misty-eyed just thinking about the difference they made and continue to make. 2 months ago, my daughter, Ellie, and I visited our international partner in San Salvador, La Casa de mi Padre, my father's house, a group home for children who can't live with their families for a variety of heartbreaking reasons. Gary Powell, executive director, picked up at the airport and asked, "How do you like my truck?" Before I could answer, he smiled and said, "It's be a rich truck, thank you." While we were there, we spent time with a local construction crew building a large retaining wall on the edge of their property. As we were leaving, Gary leaned over the said, "That's a bee ritual. Tell your folks thanks." While visiting the children's home, Gary introduced me to their newest employee, a licensed marriage and family counselor, a position they desperately needed as they seek to reconnect children with their families. As we left her office, Gary smiled and said, "Thanks to be rich, thank you." Now, I realize you and your church are already doing amazing things in your community and around the world. I assume you have your own stories you could tell. My purpose in writing this book is not to replace or improve anything you are currently doing. My goal is to create a tool that you force conversation and reflection around the topic of what to do with what we have. On this point, Jesus could not have been clearer. It is not what you have that matters. It's what you do with what you have that will count either for you or against you in the kingdom of heaven. Just so we are clear, I am not philanthropist. While I care about the poor, the issue of local or global poverty doesn't keep me up at night. I am concerned for the plight of children, but I am not on a mission to get all the available orphans in the world adopted in the Christians' homes. Though, like you, I sure wish they could be. My passion and a major reason I want to get this message into your hands is my concern for the reputation and the cultural positioning of the local church. I want you to help me re-anchor the church to undeniable, mind-blogging, cultural shifting demonstrations of compassion and generosity. Because, as we will discuss in chapter 7, generosity was the hallmark of the early church. They did for those who could not do or would not do anything in return. That was new. That got people's attention. Eventually, it shifted and shaped the moral conscience of the West. But for that to happen, there must be several shifts in our thinking. And one of the shifts relates to how we define rich. So, here we go. Chapter 1: Celebration is in order. You can never be too rich or too thin. Wallis Simpson, Duchess or Windsor. By the time they brought the patient to him, the situation looked grave. Miss A, as she was called in medical journals, was visibly stricken, and her motor skill had been reduced to semi-controlled trembles. The tail-late movements of someone nearing the end. In the confusing mix of symptoms, her family suspected tuberculosis or a blood disease. She looked less like a treatable patient and more like a discarded cadaver from behind the town hospice. Her cheeks were sunken and her skin was like cheesecloth draped over a fossil. The notion that this doctor could save her was a long shot. The possibility that she would make a complete recovery was inconceivable. Miss A's pulse was an exceptionally low 46 and her respiration was weak, but there was a nervous energy about her that suggested very high hormone levels. It did not make sense. Her organ function, urine and appetite were all normal. and yet she was clearly dying. In 1866, modern medicine was not even a dream yet. There were no CAT scans or MRIs or tests to determine blood counts or endocrine levels. The practice of medicine was little more than a catalogue of barbaric experiments. Common techniques included bloodletting, opium injections, electric shocks, and turpentine enemas. These grotesque procedures were often the final nail in the coffin for someone already weakened by fever or infection. Diseases were the leading cause of death, followed closely by the trial method devised to treat them. But Miss A had been brought to Sir William Gull, and he was not like other doctors in his era. He valued observation over action. He was slow to treat and quick to care. While he was credited with numerous medical breakthroughs, his greatest skill was his keen bedside manner. Perhaps it was his experience with the epidemics of the day, cholera, typhoid, and smallpox, that taught Gull to look beyond symptoms for the deeper cause of disease. He was a holistic problem solver, and the baffling case of Miss A would require nothing less. Most physicians would have surrendered her to death or turned her into a human lab specimen, possibly cauterizing her spine to stimulate healing or injecting her with creative connections designed to kill everything but the patient. But Gull was not intoxicated by the reckless practices of the day. We treat people, not disease, he would remind his students. He believed that many cases would resolve themselves if the physicians did not meddle too much. Once, when a lady with a rare skin disease was brought to him, Gull simply placed an extraction from one of her sores under a microscope, showed it to her, and reassured her that she would recover. But it was the only treatment he gave her, and it worked. Gull did not consider it a sign of incompetence to admit her lacked the answer to a problem either. Fools and savages explain, wise men investigate, was one of his favorite sayings. So, whenever he was not sure, he resorted to basic nursing duties while he continued to observe. He once wrote, "Acquaint yourself with the causes that have led up to the disease. Don't gaze at them, but know them through and through if you can. And if you do not know them, know that you do not, and still inquire." Only by immersing himself in the patient's experience did Gull manage to discover what others overlooked. The case of Miss A was to be a perfect example of these dedications. For 2 years, he oversaw her care, methodically nursing her back to full health with a regimen of remedies. Little by little her strength returned, and little by little Gull gathered the certainty he needed to declare a name for the disease that had almost taken Miss A's life. After careful consideration, he dubbed it anorexia nervosa. That's right, anorexia. Sir William Gull had discovered one of the most puzzling diseases of the 20th century, more than 100 years before its time. He gave it the name that still haunts headlines today, and all on his own he successfully treated dozens of cases, Miss B, Miss C, and so on. reversing the devastation and returning them to normal life. Gall meticulously documented the details of each one, and with each one he deepened our understanding of his crippling disease that offered virtually no clinical factors that a medical staff could treat. Anorexia was one of the first psychological diseases spawned by modern industrialized culture, and it has become one of its most enduring. It is remarkable, wrote one of Gall's colleagues, that a disease which no one had recognized before its existence and characters were established by Gall had since been found to exist not only in the country and on the continent but in America and Australia. Anorexia is among a class of disease that attacks the body despite the fact that it exists only in the hidden recesses of the brain, an invisible invader wreaking all too visible havoc. It is not a foreign agent like a virus or a bacteria or a cancerous cell. It is a sinister deception that hijacks the mind and programs it to destroy its own host organism.